All right, it is now time for the inescapable grass family. This is the Poaceae. This is its story. All right, so I know this is going to seem silly that I'm going to teach people how to identify a grass. Believe it or not, there's more to grass than just the stuff that people walk on that's green and covers the ground for, about an inch. Grasses have a number of unifying characteristics. The grass family is about the third or fourth largest plant family, with close to 19,000 species. They have a few things that are very commonly shared and associated with the grasses. First of all, their stems are round, and they're hollow except for the nodes. Now, we're going to see this in the Poaceae field trip, and it's going to be really cool. But their stems are hollow, and it's not that there's not vasculature. The vasculature is just compressed to the edges of the stems. So when you take a cross section, the inner wall is going to have those tubes. Also remember that this is a monocot. Their leaves are alternate. They can only have one leaf per node because they're monocots. For people who are wondering about the lawn grasses, these are just very compressed stems with a few leaves sticking off of them, which is why it looks like it's just single blades of grass sticking up from the ground. One grass plant may have several leaf blades. They just are so compact and close together, it doesn't look like that's the case. They have this weird way of flowering. The inflorescence is kind of reduced. They have these kind of leafy petals around the flowers. Now, petals are actually modified leaves. There is a sterile flower underneath each actual flower, and those sterile flowers are called glumes. The flowers have 6 petals. However, you can't really determine where the petals are because they are greatly reduced. Most of the grasses are pollinated by wind, so there's no need for a lot of petalage or anything special to the flowers. They simply make flowers that have wind-dispersed pollen that lands on other flowers and pollinates the grass. This is why when you have corn, you want to plant them within a certain distance of each other and perhaps even shake plants to get the pollen moving. Also, this is why grasses are a great source of seasonal allergies, because they rely on the wind to disperse their pollen rather than insects. Now, they have 3 or 6 stamens and 2 or 3 carpels per pistil on a flower. Now, bamboo is a type of grass, and it's a very primitive type of grass. And so it has a couple of ancestral grass traits that we don't see in other grasses. Now, most grasses are perennials. They're basically all herbaceous. Remember, they can't technically become trees because they're monocots, but they can get quite large. Bamboo is one of the fastest growing plants on the face of the earth, and it can grow 4+ inches a day. They get huge, many dozens of feet tall. They have seeds that generally get carried by the wind. I mean, you've seen the stereotypical grass seed pod here where it's just all this cottony fluff that gets picked up and the seeds move about. They are very important for nutrient cycling in the ecosystem. Remember that they are the food source for a lot of primary consumers. Grasses have a special type of photosynthesis called C4 photosynthesis. We are not going to talk about that because it's a very complicated topic, but it's a more efficient means of photosynthesis that allows grasses to dominate landscapes, allows grasses to be very efficient in their water usage, very good at storing things, growing, and providing a food source for a lot of different organisms, mostly animals. I mean, there are some fungus species that will feed on live grass, but we're not going to worry about that. We have, cattle grazing. Out in the African savanna, that would be like wildebeest and zebras that are then, the bottom of the food chain for some of the larger carnivores. And when they die, vultures eat them and things like that. You can't have a lot of terrestrial food webs without grass. So grass is incredibly important. Everybody's favorite animal, the panda, feeds, almost entirely on bamboo. I mean, in the wild, they'll occasionally eat fruits and scavenge things, but they eat almost entirely bamboo. And bamboo is really interesting because large stands of bamboo will grow for decades, sometimes centuries. And then in the span of a few short months, every bamboo in that stand blooms, pollinates, sets its seed, and then dies. They are monocarpic plants. We've talked about monocarpic plants before. They produce their seeds once in their life, and they put so much energy into producing their seeds, they die. Agave, which is not in the Poaceae, is like this as well. I actually had to tell my friend not to water her agave too much, not because the plant would die from too much water, but because the extra water would induce it to bloom, which would then kill it, because it's programmed to die after blooming. Bamboo is the same way. So pandas actually have to stay in areas where there are multiple bamboo species so that they don't have their food source disappear one day and they starve to death. Grasses are found worldwide, and by worldwide I mean truly worldwide. There are 2 vascular plant species found in Antarctica, with Antarctic hairgrass being one of them. So we don't even have an aster or an orchid in Antarctica, and those are larger plant families. Now, I suspect that because grass has a really superb ability to sit somewhere and hold space and use resources, this is why we have the ability to get a grass living in Antarctica. So, there's a grass that lives in Antarctica. So, grasses are monocots, like I said. They're still angiosperms, they're still flowering plants, they're still vascular plants. Now, this may be a polyphyletic family, which again means that the grasses we know today probably didn't all come from a single common ancestor. Although the common ancestors of the different groups of grasses did at one point share a common ancestor, some of the other descendants are now extinct and it's just the grass. Now, they have 12 subfamilies in this group. We usually group the subfamilies by the vegetative habits, so the way the leaves are arranged. Meanwhile, the tribes, which are a subdivision of that subfamily, is usually grouped by the floral characters. They are within the order Poaceae, which has a lot of things that look like grass but are not grass. Sedges, rushes, which look more like grasses than sedges, I will say. Bromeliads, arguably grass-like, and then cattails, which are not grass, but they look a lot like grass with little puffs on the ends of them. So we have the Poaceae here, and we have just this nice rundown of different plant families. So the closest relative of the Poaceae is the Flagellariaceae, which is just a small family of kind of insignificant plants we're not going to talk about. And then this is a phylogeny of the actual grass family for people who are interested. There are a lot of bamboos out there, but again, bamboo is one of the more primitive parts of the grass family. So, you really can't go a day in your life without seeing or eating. Not only are there a lot of poaceous foods that you can go out and buy, but a lot of foods that we have are made of members of the Poaceae. So wheat and corn are incorporated into a great number of products. If you look at the ingredient list for a number of things, you're going to see corn or wheat, or perhaps both. Most baking flours are wheat flour. Now, some people are intolerant to gluten, or they've decided not to incorporate gluten in their diet, so there are alternatives. Flour is basically a leavening agent, which gives certain properties to a food you're producing, and you rely on particular proteins from a plant part in order to get the flour. So there are alternatives to wheat. Wheat is the classic flour, and some alternative flours you have to add certain things to in order to allow for the right chemical reactions to occur. So I've actually done gluten-free baking for people who were gluten-free, and I generally use a mixed flour, which has, I think it was like tapioca flour with like quinoa flour, and it was just a blend of different things, which is good for just making sure that it doesn't add a particular taste to the material. Like almond flour, which we're going to see in a field trip, is useful, but it could leave a bitter taste if you're not careful with it. And so having a mix of different flours kind of evens that out. But what you have to do is add xanthan gum or something to that flour in order to get the proper leavening, or incorporation of air and expansion of material for whatever cooking and baking you're trying to do. But wheat is the classic flour production. You make bread with wheat, you make all sorts of materials with wheat. Corn is in the grass family, so is rice. Now, rice is a huge staple in the diet of a lot of people worldwide, particularly in Asia and parts of Africa, where a lot of other plants just can't grow very easily. Rice is incredibly important. They have actually genetically modified rice to synthesize vitamins it normally wouldn't, so that the people who rely heavily on rice for a food source have an easier time getting a complete diet. So rice is a big deal. Barley, lemongrass, millet, a lot of your grains basically are in the grass family. There are also species that we grow for their ornamental value. We can see zebra grass right here. I actually have some zebra grass specimens. The plant called blue-eyed grass, by the way, is not actually a true grass. It just gets its name because the stems that hold the flowers are grass-like, and they're more prominent than leaves. There's also a lot of cultural nuance to the grass family. I don't know if people have learned in history class about the ancient world and how people would be a little bit more barbaric in the way they punished people. There was a rumor that bamboo was used for torture and execution in Asia, I think up until the First World War, wherein you would have a freshly cut stem, and somebody who you were torturing would be basically bound to the ground, maybe having some tough staples put around them. They were attached to the ground, and the bamboo stems grew so quickly and were so strong they could pierce the person's body cavity, and that would apparently cause, a prolonged, excruciating death. Now, they did experiments on Mythbusters, and I think in an actual lab, where they used ballistic jelly, which, if people don't know what ballistic jelly is, it's a material that has the same consistency as the human body. So if something can puncture the ballistic jelly, it can puncture the human body. That's basically the purpose of ballistic jelly. This is a possible thing to do. However, they don't know if this was actually done. There were rumors that people were torturing each other in Asia with this method. However, there is no reliable historical evidence to suggest that this actually happened, so we don't really know. We don't know if somebody told a tall tale. We don't know if there were a few isolated instances of it happening and people, blew it out of proportion. Maybe it did actually happen. I don't know. But this is one of those ways that the grass family affects society and the way the grass family affects us. We have this story. Whether it happened or not, it's still something that people talk about. It's still something people think about. And, they could devote an entire episode to a television show about this purported idea. Bamboo is also very useful for building various structures. I'm sure everybody's seen bamboo stakes, which are available at the store for plants to be grown against and things like that. So bamboo is very important. Bamboo has also become kind of invasive around here. I don't know if anybody's ever gone to the bamboo maze at the Fantastic Umbrella Factory in Charlestown, Rhode Island. That's really fun. That's bamboo. The stuff gets huge. There are hundreds upon hundreds of species of bamboo. So we've got grasses.